Beginners, you guys make mistakes. Well, I'm here to fix them. So today we have 9 really common mistakes that beginners like to make and how to fix them really quickly and easily. But before we get into that, do me a huge favour, and if you enjoy this video and find it helpful, give it a like, subscribe if you're new. But now, let's fix these mistakes, shall we? So to start off, we're going to go over the basics. I'm going to talk about hand positioning, specifically your fretting hand. So what we don't want to see is having our thumb over the neck. This is because it limits the stretch we can get with our other fingers. So what we want to do is have our thumb vertical and about halfway down the neck. This is generally the best spot for comfortability and the best stretch. We also don't want to overextend our wrist, because that can lead to problems later down the line. The next mistake I want to talk about is not using the tips of your fingers to fret notes. Beginners usually use the pads of their fingers, which is this bit right here, which means that you have a very flat hand position. We don't want this. What we want to do is have our fingers curled over the fretboard so we don't interfere with other strings, and use the tip of our fingers to fret notes. This also makes it much easier to do legato, so hammer-ons and pull-offs. This brings me rather nicely onto my next point, and that's having weak pull-offs. So when we're doing pull-offs, we're not just lifting off the fret, we're doing more of a flick. So for example, just lifting off, now flicking off, much more of a stronger sound, which is what we want because we're not going to be picking to produce the sound. So we need to have a very strong pull-off when doing legato. The next mistake beginners make is angling their fingers. So what we don't want to see is this, which usually goes along with the Hendrix grip. This isn't great because it limits our range of motion, so we won't get a bigger stretch, compared to if we were just to bring our hand in, meaning that we get a nice straight positioning of our fingers. This is angled and not angled, that's much easier, and I can get up to here. Small change, but a big difference. It's also much more comfortable for your wrist as well, because it's not put in such a strained position if you have them vertical or straight. The fifth mistake is going to be having what's called flying fingers, or not staying close to the fretboard. So when we talk about flying fingers, what we're saying is that we have these big movements which make it much slower to play. This means that we have a big distance to travel, which means that we can't fret a note quick enough, and it's also not as controlled as well, so you have more margin for error. What we want to do is stay very close to the fretboard with a very tight movement to the fretboard. Not so much that we're muting the string when we're trying to fret, but just enough so we have a clean sound and a clean motion. It also means that we can play much faster because we have less distance to travel when we're going from not fretting to fretting. The next mistake is that we're not staying loose and that we are applying way too much pressure when we're fretting. So when we're picking, but more specifically strumming, we want to have a very smooth and loose motion. So not just being really janky and using our elbow entirely, because that produces a much more harsh sound, which isn't really what we want. So what we want to do is involve our wrist so we stay loose. I like to think about it as quite nearly dead weight, so it's just very floppy. Kind of like that scene from Harry Potter, but not so much that it isn't controlled. And when we're picking, we want to use basically only our wrist. So we're not going to be going, because that's janky and it's messy and it's not at all controlled. So what we want to do is move our wrist up and down like that when we pick. You can see my elbow is basically not moving at all. This makes it so much more controlled and much easier to play as well, especially when alternate picking. The next mistake is not moving our picking hand when we are going through a scale. So what we don't want to see is having our wrist planted in one position and then angling our hand or wrist down to get to the higher strings. What we want to do is follow our picking with our wrist moving down the bridge. This makes our picking consistent, controlled, and much more easier because we're staying consistent and we're not having these weird awkward angles. Another mistake beginners make is not using multiple fingers while bending. For some reason you guys like to use one finger, which is not efficient at all. So what we want to do is use 3 fingers, or we can use 2 fingers while doing a blues kind of thing. I also do sometimes like to use the Hendrix thumb over grip, or I just bring my thumb up a little bit so you can see it there, just so I can get a little bit of leverage on the curvature of the neck, so I can get a much stronger bend. And the last mistake I want to talk about is actually a synchronization issue, and it's where we have double notes. So it's a mix of accidental legato and a mistimed pick. It sounds a little bit like this. So all it is we're just playing out of sync. So what we could do, but I wouldn't recommend this to beginners because it's a little bit tedious and boring, but we can do some exercises to help the synchronization, or do what I'd recommend and just simply really focus on bringing the synchronization of your picking hand and fretting hand together. So when you hear those double notes, just try really focus on getting the timing correctly. Or you could bring down the speed, get the synchronization perfect, and work your way back up. Because speed can probably be the problem. Because it might be that one of your hands moves or reacts quicker than the other one. For instance, my fretting hand is much faster than my picking hand at the minute. So that was 9 different mistakes that beginners like to make. And yes, it's a different day. I forgot to record an outro, which is slightly embarrassing. But if you found this video enjoyable and helpful, then give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next one.